Hello and welcome to today's Magnetic News episode. I'm your host, Jessica Ann, and I am joined by co host Sunshine. Today is our part two in our series of reclaiming or how women betray their sexuality or have been conditioned to give away their power and their inner authority when it comes to sexuality. Today is part two, and we are talking about how do we reclaim it. So, just before we begin, if you want to listen to part one, it's episode 8, part one. This is episode 10, part two.
Perfect. So last time we did kind of leave off on the ways that we give up our authority, and as Jessica was saying, we're going to talk about some ways that we reclaim it, and specifically who we gave the authority to, right? Because like there are so many ways that we give it away, and being aware of where we've set that power makes it easier for us to pick it back up. And so one of the first indicators or things that you want to check in on is your yes and whether or not you've made a distinction between what's a genuine yes and what is performative or coerced in some sense of you're just in a situation where you feel like you're supposed to say yes.
Can I ask you then, how would a woman determine what is performative for her as opposed to what a yes is?
Yeah, for me personally, it has everything to do with my body wisdom. So, I have had like chronic. Well, I don't have them anymore, thankfully, but in my youth, I had like chronic issues with my throat. And so whenever I'm consenting to something or about to give a yes that's not real, I can feel it in my throat. There's like a constriction, if that makes sense. So just being aware of your body and having that body wisdom and a lot of reflection on different times when you didn't have a pure, true yes, and being able to say, well, how was I feeling in my body? Getting back in that moment to be able to pick up on those cues. That's how can tell whether my yes is genuine based on how my body reacts to it.
I think that's a really good piece of advice. For me, I asked that from the lens and the place of literally coming out of celibacy after, I think, 6 years or so, and really shutting down my sexuality
Mm.
actually a lot. It was just not a big focus in my life in that part of my journey. I have a deep sexuality, deep sensuality, and a love of sex. But in that period, I found actually I wasn't even really playing with myself as much as I used to. Like there wasn't really a desire. I had really closed down my libido ultimately. And what I found when I connected with the ghost of lovers past, two things happened. He was a very beautiful lover, a generous lover, and he asked me what my kinks were, like what my turn-ons were, and I didn't know. I had actually didn't I hadn't ever really sat down, or this period of my life, maybe in the past, but I so there were things I knew that were just normal. Anyway, I say all of that to say, on one of the occasions, he literally he opened my eyes to something that I never thought I would have done, and it wasn't something that I consciously would have like, I would never have gone, "I wanna try this thing."
Mm.
And it was like, I really enjoyed it, and it's something that I it was an absolute yes, but it was not a conscious yes. Like, I didn't come it going, "Okay, this is something I'm gonna do." In fact, it was something I'd always been like, "That's not for me." So going it was my body that allowed me, and obviously there was a deep sense of trust. It wasn't performative. So even though it was something that he obviously loved, and I remember even 10 years before, he tried it with me then, and I was like, "No, no, I'm not doing this." And so there was a no there, but this time there was a yes, and it fucking turned me on. And so, yeah, I think the body wisdom thing is the key. If I had said yes back in the day when it was a complete no and my body was clenched, it would have been performative.
Right. Absolutely. I have some similar things where just over time and as the intimacy increases, there's just a different level of comfort and you're able to do some things that maybe before you weren't completely comfortable with. So that makes sense, just like being open and flexible. And then also vice versa, just because something has been comfortable for you in the past or pleasurable for you in the past doesn't mean that that's going to, be this truth for your entire life. Your body changes, your desires change, and, so on and so forth. When you were talking, it made me think about like this kind of like one of the last, layers of attachment healing that I had in my connections was around the belief that I had that sex equals love. And,
Yeah.
on a conscious level, it's like, obviously not, like there's no logical, connection there. As an adult, you understand that sex is not love, but, that young child in me believed that, well, if you're loved, there's going to be sex involved and it's going to come a certain kind of way. And relating those feelings of like euphoria and all of that that comes on through the sex to, okay, this is what love feels like,
Yeah.
right? And so I recently kind of like shed that layer of like, hey, you can have great sex with somebody that don't give a fuck about you.
Yes. Oh, we spoke. I think we spoke to touch on that last week, or did we? Or did was it in a private talk when I was saying I think it was a podcast, wasn't it? I was saying I wish that I didn't. He wasn't my initiation because where I am now, I could have gone into that consciously and had a great lover without having to attach all that meaning onto him. And I would have enjoyed, been able to have someone that I could call and enjoy being ravished in the best way. But it got completely ruined because of because I couldn't accept his capacity and actually shape the relationship in a conscious way. Now, I just want to build on that as well, because at the time, and I said to him, like, I, I don't want, like, if we're not going to commit, and again, it was demanding, it was pushy, it was like I didn't leave space. I wasn't in my feminine. I was definitely in my woundedness, right? Now, I said to him, because I was trying to, my third line, because the third line, bonds made, bonds broken. Third lines also test relationships. So, you know how they
Oh,
said
okay.
some women who are in their wounded feminine will test or have the father wound. Some lines of argument are if you have a father wound, you'll test relationships. Actually, it's a very third line energy as well. But so what I kept trying to do, even I kept trying to renegotiate, and maybe there's a lot here, but I kept trying to renegotiate how I could make this work. Whether we could be so compromising some of my needs as well. But also want, and part of me, my old part, there was a part of me that was able to enjoy someone and accept them who they were and enjoy their body without attaching meaning. But because I was going through that journey of my gene key 59, and I was really looking at what my relationship with intimacy had been all my life, I was going down many, many routes and seeing, well, actually, is that a defense and a protection where I was so I had to go through this journey, but I wish I tried to renegotiate it. And I said to him, my big problem is that I'm going to get, because I got attached the first time. Well, I was already attached when he came back the second time, but we had agreed the first time to be just friends with benefits, which is
Mm.
we both got attached to each other. Or maybe I misread that. I don't know. I don't think so. Um, but the point is, then obviously having done a lot of study last year on the chemicals of bonding and relationship, it made me very weary to say, okay, I'm just going to get into this casual thing because oxytocin, the bonding, and how women bond and create attachment. And that's how you get stuck in a relationship that isn't aligned for you. So that's why I didn't unfortunately allow myself to go down that road.
Yeah, I got the chills when you said that. Just talking about how a lot of times when we were talking about, being in that sexual liberation kind of era and feeling like, oh, I can do whatever I want. And, I don't have to catch feelings and like all of those things. And, you know, there is a level of like, will and like self control and, manipulating of your own subconscious that you can do in order to decrease those bonds that are created. But I think it's also at the same time so important to acknowledge how sacred of an act sex is and what it's truly designed for. And like you said, how those chemical attachments and bonds happen and like what's really being exchanged in those moments beyond what you see, beyond what you may even feel like there's real chemistry happening in those moments that you can't just think away.
Yeah.
And
But yeah, go
go
on.
ahead.
No, you go on. Go on.
I was just saying, as I was thinking about like the question of who have I given my sexual authority to, I think a big part of my life and my sexual authority belonged to my trauma.
Yes. Oh my God. Boom, bam,
And
bam, bam. Yeah.
and so like what you were saying about being in those relationships with people and now I'm subject to this person who really has no emotional attachment to me. It's
Yes.
me that's got all of this attachment to this other person. I'm willing to do whatever, be whatever, say whatever in order to maintain this connection and this bond that I feel through the sex because that's
Yeah.
what makes me feel connected because I haven't had like the level of intimacy that I'm actually craving and the only way for me to get that piece of intimacy that I want had been through sex. So it's
Yeah.
almost like this person has this lever over you that they can flip switches because you have made that attachment and then kind of for me, I had kind of lied to myself about it. Of, oh, we're just friends, and I don't care, and and saying all of that. But then, really underneath the surface, like I'm actually attached to this person. I'm crying at night, and all of the all of the stuff that comes along with it. So just being aware of when saying yes to something is of detriment to you in the long term and it doesn't actually serve you no matter how good it feels or what it is that you think you're getting out of it, just being able to evaluate and say, okay, I said yes in this situation, but what did I actually gain and how did it actually benefit me and what part of myself was I abandoning to say yes continually in this situation. I just don't know that you can really have sex with somebody over a long term and not have an emotional connection to them. I just don't know that that's a reasonable expectation unless you're doing something intentionally, ritualistically to break those bonds that you are creating with that person.
Or in my case, and I have had long-term booty calls, where I had no emotional connection to them. But I think that like that's what I'm saying with that. When I was in my wounded huntress era in my career era, this is where the father wound thing really does come in for me and really resonates, which is why I want to build that work because I was detached. But then again, I was equally very numbed out. Like I had no so there was a very, very, very core and when you look at Gene Key 59, sorry, and I was wondering, is this something I sell as a Gene Key 59 journey and pathway?
Mhm.
Because it is Gene Key 59, or do I keep it open to the fact? That's why I said about making the universal individual, because actually this is a Gene Key evolutionary pathway from dishonesty to transparency.
Mm.
Because when I was in that era, I had no emotional I could literally have sex I was like a man. I was. There was no oxytocin, but then maybe it was because I was always, like, numbed out. I was smoking weed like, literally from morning till night. I was on the wine, I was cocaine or stimulants. So, there was also a big detachment as well. Like, my actions maybe I was very, very dissociated, but I also had a time of my life, like, these periods wasn't a bad period for me.
Right.
But when I look back at like, well, why haven't I ever had an actual sacred partnership or a sacred union that I consider to be mutual reciprocal? I mean, they were reciprocal, but what I mean is like a marriage, a sacred, a conscious partnership. Um, so yeah, so I don't know why I was saying that, but yeah, can you? I think women who are very, very in the father wound and very, very detached and in their avoidance, which is also what I call the wounded huntress archetype. You're when that huntress archetype is imbalanced and in that energy, you can have long term booty calls and have zero interest in any form of emotional connection with them. But that was and And that's why this journey last year, I was like, I'm not I like, my next connection, my next partnership is real. But then I am completely present now. So I'm not on drugs. I've done 6, 7 years of deep, deep evolution on my psyche, and I'm only available for conscious connection. So yes, I might be open to conscious sex, possibly, but that's not what I'm looking for right now. But I'm saying I think I'm at the stage where that could be a potential. Now I've done like I had that deep work. Yeah, yeah. But I'm also, as I said, aware of those chemicals, so it's not something I'm open to right now. Any men out there listening, I want a ring.
Right? And so I think this is a good place to pivot into talking about the difference between desire and obligation. Um, because in my marriage, I went into it with some very outdated, religious, rigid ideals about what my responsibilities were as a wife. And, I basically bought into the, hey, whenever he wants it, you need to be ready to provide it so that he doesn't cheat on you, right? And
Yeah.
so
And the men will
then it
still
makes
cheat.
it,
Sorry, but go on. I shouldn't interrupt.
yeah, then it makes it, my fault if he cheats because I'm not putting out the way that I should be or whatever. And it's like, I, had in my marriage had 2 children. I was depressed before he ever came along, and then something about postpartum depression that just, like, really spirals me down or whatever, so it's like, I felt, like, silly sometimes off The Color Purple, just laying there, let you get on top of me and do your thing so I can, kinda move on or whatever, but not really being able to allow myself to say, "Hey, I don't really, wanna do this right now. Let's do it some other time," because there was, infidelity in the relationship, and I was trying to use that to control. So I was coming from an intention of fear in those moments of trying to, "Okay, well, if I don't, then he's going to do such and such and such and so and so. So let me go ahead and just do what it is I gotta do and get this out of the way," in order to fulfill my wifely duties and not really being connected to, well, is this something that I really want? Am I even fully aroused? Am I going to even be able to reach a climax or, have pleasure in this moment because I'm doing it from a place of obligation as opposed to desire?
Because all that's flowing through my head right now is there was no polarity in your relationship, right? So this was an unconscious marriage. It wasn't even really a sacred union. It was, I don't know, convenience perhaps of some way. Because what I'm moving towards is, well, you've already moved towards it as well. You've had sexual liberation, you've had a sexual awakening, but for me, it's like I want to go deep. Like my husband and I, we're going to have the greatest sex because we're both going to be compatible. That's the first thing. But also like that polarity piece is key. And being
Mhm.
able to keep that going, like, and I want that conscious partnership, but I want to talk about a time in my life when I was young, in my first relationship, when I was 14, between 14 and like 17 or 18, that was coercive. I don't know why. I mean, I was a child, so maybe that's why I was doing it. But this guy, I there most of the, like often he would wake me up, fucking me. So as much as I enjoyed it at the time, I I don't know how I feel about. I mean, because I do enjoy that. I like being woken up. Maybe there was a complicit agreement that that was okay. But when I look back and look at his actual psyche and his he was a guy who ended up pouring hot water on his baby mother and went to prison
Mm.
for it. So and he wasn't as so I was his earlier thing. So I didn't
Or he
experience.
progressed to that.
Yeah, before there was signs of abuse starting in our relationship. So I got attacked once with a bike chain, and I had this like black eye around my eye, and he ripped my coat. Like he like any if I bought something nice, he would ruin it. He stole. So there were elements there, but he hadn't really upped the ramp. But what was weird was like I couldn't not give him head. So if I said no, that no didn't exist. So there was this obligate like this like and I would say to him, I'd literally be crying, giving him head and going, I don't want to be doing this. But then you ask yourself, I mean, I know I was 14, but I look back, that pattern actually re-emerged when I was with that second abusive partner in that before my awakening. So there was, but I look at Gene Key 40 and Gene Key 59, and the shadow is repression and denial and acquiescence.
Mm.
So in Gene Key, and my whole chart is about raising my self worth and self empowerment. So I'm not saying that um I'm not saying that I'm to blame. What I'm saying though is that these were concrete examples of where I was going through this evolutionary pathway in my chart of actually giving away my power, whether I had been conditioned from what I'd seen in the family home of how a woman, which was huge. I grew up in a domestic violence household where the woman gave away her power and overfunctioned and did everything. There was no polarity at all in that. There was no healthy masculine provider energy. Or, um, in fact, there was just a very dark, wounded masculine energy. So, but that pattern didn't go away, even though I had become empowered in between, it returned. And so integrating and really working with your gene keys, I think, could give you a huge insight into we know this from the Venus sequence, but into why you have given away your power and where it shows up in your life. So yeah, that was a big one for me.
Yeah, and I hit on it a little bit on the last time as well of just how, my first experiences with sex were not consensual. They were coerced and under, duress of like, well, if you don't do this, then I'm going to tell your parents that you did. And like, just this like manipulative type, energy or whatever. And not realizing that, I carried that pattern with me from that point until I did some work to kind of unwind that or whatever and take away um that aspect within me that felt like, well, this is normal and this is just a part of how sex is. Sometimes you're not going to want to do it and you have to.
Yeah. And I think we can also I mean, we can look at it from a soul level, as in you come in with
Mhm.
lesson. For me, it's self-worth and self-empowerment, and it's the key thread all throughout, and evolving into that woman. And that's why the Maiden to the Queen body of work is going to change so many lives on this planet. It makes me cry when I think about the Maiden to the Queen program and what I'm building. It makes me very emotional. But then there's also the childhood patterning. And so recently, I had a dream a few days ago, and I told you about it, where I saw the ghost of lovers past, which wasn't a real event, but I wanted to kiss him on the lips, and he was like kissing me elsewhere, like on my cheeks. So he was not giving me full intimacy. And rather than me walking away from that, I was okay to accept I was compromised and gave in, lessened my own needs, and I saw that, and so I was able to take myself on one of my shadow to sovereign processes and integrate that part back into power. But the beauty was, this is actually a real life pattern that I saw with the guy that I experienced with the booty call from 2013 up until 2018, who ended up then being really abusive and sparking the awakening. Um, when he came out of prison, that's how we met. I was introduced from a family member. So when he came out, the first time we met, he was very loving, very tactile, very kissy. And then over time, because he is a narcissist. There is no, like, he has extreme narcissistic traits, um, antisocial disorder traits. Like, this is a man who lacks empathy. There's a lot. Um, as time got went on, our sex became just very controlled. As in, it wasn't about my pleasure. It was literally about him using my body as a vessel to just dump his cum in. And it was like I couldn't move. He was controlling. There was no kissing. And it's like, why did I accept that? Because for me, it was just like, oh, it was that years. It was like when I was in my huntress years. It was like I don't have time. I'm avoidant. I'm deeply avoidant, but I'm also deeply suppressed in my needs. I'm not really, and it was like easy. You could come, you could go. I got something, but it didn't demand too much of me. And do you see what I'm saying?
I think, like, we have naturally moved into access versus intimacy.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, just because, someone is, there with you or the act is going on, it doesn't mean that there's a deep level of true connection. It doesn't mean that you're seen in that moment or that you're deeply seeing the other individual and, consciously choosing to open yourself to one another and make yourself vulnerable to one another. I mean, just as you were speaking, it just made me think about times where I was like, "This person is just, like, using me to masturbate, basically, like, what am
Yeah.
I even here for?"
Yeah.
What am I even here for? You don't need me. Let me get you a little pocket, so you can just
But when I had my dark night of the soul, because it really, like, I remember, and he was the awakener, which is beautiful as well. But like, I give deep gratitude for that. Even though it was dark, it was one of the most beautiful like transformational pathways for me to wake up and step into who the fuck I am. Because he sat across the room from me. Oh gosh, and he said, "You don't love yourself," and those words were like a cosmic alarm. That it woke me up, and so when I got him out of the house and I was so broke. I was literally empty. I cannot describe what a dark night feels like. Have you had a dark night of the soul?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So like you're numb. Nothing. You're an empty vessel. Like it's very disorientating. And I remember that was the first time I realized I'd never been loved. I'd never truly actually been loved. And that's when I began to understand. That's when I first met my inner child. Um, and I was like, "What?" Well, the question began, "Am I even lovable?" Oh, chills in my back. Um, I can't remember why I led on to that. It was something about. But anyway, I don't know. I can't remember.
He told you that, you never
Um,
loved yourself or whatever, talking about the difference between access and intimacy.
can't remember, but yeah, that was the pathway, and that's when I did my first. I started. That's when shadow work began. Anyway, and that was the rise of my first rise into back to wholeness. And I did a lot of soul retrieval because the fragmented parts from all these years. I think I was going to link it to, yeah, childhood attachment wounding, I think, versus soul wounding. So, we have these two dimensions where actually my view is my actual view from actually the work we've been doing and the work I've been creating is that yes, we have these soul wounds, and actually, yes, we get these childhood, but it's only because we're choosing the family that's going to allow us to actually experience those things. But the
I'd love for you to go into that a little bit, more deeply. A lot of times when I talked about that, there's been a resistance around, "Oh, you're victim blaming," and, all of these things are, not being able to distinguish between just, like, radical soul level accountability and justifying harm and things that were, done, making sure that there's, like, a clear delineation between, okay, I consciously on a soul level have connected and said, "Oh, okay, I understand why I got these lessons, why these patterns happen in my childhood, because there's a wounding that I chose to resolve. There's an interference that I wanted to clear, and then this just so happens to be a pathway in which I was able to do that, and seeing, a lot of the things that happen in childhood, the family you chose as a pathway to achieving soul purpose and healing and evolution, as opposed to feeling like, a victim to everything that you've experienced throughout your life.
I agree, and I think there was so much like, and I'll stand by it because I stand by this worldview or philosophy, or I'm gonna call it a philosophy, or I stand by this reality for myself because it became to me in my awakening. So
Mhm.
people that resist it, I understand it's going to be very difficult for some people to accept that, and some people, um, victim consciousness, to be honest, is is a survival mechanism, which is why in Shadow to Sovereign I talk about the four survival archetypes. We all have the victim, we all
Mhm.
have the saboteur, we all have the what's the one I always forget?
Prostitute.
No, no, that's the one I love. I love the prostitute. That girl and I are like best friends. But
The wounded child, the prostitute, the saboteur,
yeah.
and the one that we're talking about that now I can't remember.
But I think it is about levels of consciousness. So some people are will always
Victim.
remain in the victim because who do they have to be or what do they get to be if they don't? It
Mhm.
requires evolution, it requires change. And I only speak on this because it was the consciousness shift that came to me in my actual awakening pathway. So when that realization came into me as a deep embodied comprehension, not just something I hear, but something I knowing, um, that's when my healing began because it made sense. And some people I've heard people saying this is spiritual bypassing or this is what trauma victims do to make sense of it.
Meaning
Make
making
meaning.
of it,
Like,
yeah.
uh, you know, all each to their own. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And then, as you were talking, as it relates to access and intimacy, I think for a lot of us as well, for myself in my healing journey, it's like that realization that you have about being raised in an environment of survival as opposed to one of love, and just that kind of like internal conflict. Like, as you were saying, like, am I lovable? It made me think about a part in my journey where I was like questioning if I had ever been loved, like from the very beginning, because my parents were in survival mode and they did use fear and control and
yeah,
shame in order to rear me. And they just believed that that was the right thing to do. And they were motivated by fear in doing that. So it's like, well, have I ever really truly received like a pure, unconditional love that I didn't have to earn, that I didn't have to work for, that I didn't have to maintain? And, questioning that just was a very heavy, emotional, jarring thing to kinda, deal with or whatever. Because you never, except under extreme circumstances, nobody says, "Oh, my parents never loved me." Like, that's not a thought that you have, but then once you understand what nurturing and care looks like from a place of love as opposed to a place of fear, it's kind of like one of those things that you have to accept, of like, they did the best that they can with
yeah.
what they had, but they were motivated by fear and survival. And so it's just a different vibration than what
Yeah.
comes when you're motivated by love and truth.
But now you're going deep into is any romantic relationship that like love or because if because what you're saying is because most people are not, they what is love? Is this a Fugees album now?
Right? But, that's, the unveiling for all of us, right? That's the point of evolution for all of us, of really deciding and determining and clarifying what is love, and what does that expression look like through me and to me, from others, and being able to distinguish, um, the intent behind the interactions that you're having with people. Like when you were talking about my marriage, it was a needs based attachment. I attached to
Mhm.
this man because I needed him, and although I thought I was deeply in love with him, I can honestly this day say I was not. I was not in love with him. I care for him? Did I have strong emotions and feelings for him? And, did I want to nurture his inner child? And, even before I even knew what an inner child was, like I just always looked at him and saw this little boy that, was treated, however he was treated in his family and went through
Yeah.
the things that he went through. And I always wanted to, connect with and love on that part of him. But the fear that I had about losing him and not being able to keep him within the constraints that served my needs kept me from really always operating from that place of love that I had for him and his essence, his soul, who he really is.
I think this is a big problem for priestess women as well, because when you said that, I'm looking back at all of the abusive relationships, and what drew me to them was this. And I don't think it's a fixer. I think it's a misappropriation. It's love without discernment, because that was the thing, And they do talk about this. He even put up a post in his Instagram years ago, and I was like, "Oh man!" And it was like a dark devil and a white angel, and it was like she was attracted to his darkness, and he was attracted to her light or whatever. But the and we're not even like there's more nuance to that, because he was reflecting my own shadow and my own darkness and darkness within myself too. Um, but I always had a deep this boundless love, this love, what I call love, and I call it unconditional love, not attachment, something very pure. And seeing that and wanting to not fix or save, even though there were elements of that as well, but there was definitely a purity. And I think for a lot of women who are priestesses, healers, light workers, whatever, actually come into that earth and transmit that. And that can get until you become understand the earthly plane, it can be problematic in relationships. Like the guy from last year, like I was I d I do, but yes, I was attached, but I definitely have unconditional love for him as well. And as you said, can see all the trauma and what's causing his behavior, and where the nervous system is, where he's really leading from and what's really going on. But it's not something I'm gonna stay in. I don't know what I'm really saying here, but yeah. I would love us to talk about this is my favorite. When you spoke about this, I was like, this bit excites me the most. Who taught you about sex? Let's get into that.
Yeah, so my like I said, my first encounters with sex, I was probably about like 4 or 5 years old when I had a family member to start molesting me or whatever. So those were, my first encounters and like my first understanding of it. I was very sheltered. I had never seen anything on TV. Like my parents would make me cover my eyes if somebody was kissing on TV. So I had no, concept of sex. I wasn't even 100% sure if what we were doing was wrong, or like I just wasn't completely in limbo. And so that was kind of like my first experience. And then when I was 7 years old, um my mom and I moved, to a different location, and she got really religious and into a church, and so there was a lot of religious programming around sex. And basically the message was don't do it because you're gonna get pregnant. And it was like that was the motivation behind it, was just telling you don't do it because you're gonna get pregnant. And it was a very fear, shame, control kind of motivated system. And of course, when something is done from an intention of fear, what is feared is manifested. So of course, a lot of the young ladies that were in that same environment became teenage mothers, and have multiple children out of wedlock. And so that was kind of where I um gained that kind of first grooming around sex. And then when I got ready to like really explore my own sexuality, probably I was around 13, 14 years old, I started watching porn.
Yeah.
because we had the dial-up AOL, you get in, the chat room, start talking to people, they tell you how to get to things that you otherwise wouldn't know about, and so kinda, learn some things there and, kinda like that performative, put on
Yeah.
a show kinda energy or whatever is what
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
took on for my own, like, person, like, "Oh, this is what, I personally am drawn to," or whatever, and, being able to show up in intimate settings in a very erotic, that femme fatale
Yeah.
energy or whatever, but
Yeah.
not realizing that a lot of what I saw in porn was, just performative. These people are acting. This isn't actually what sex is like. And, kinda going from there, it's kinda like where my foundation was built. How about you? Where did you, learn about sex?
There was porn in my house. So my stepdad used to watch porn. And so I would, or sometimes I put a video on which had like Alice in Wonderland written on it, and you put it in, and porn would like, whoa, what's? So I saw porn and had access to porn at a very early age. But also, I tell you, who was my biggest like, I loved Madonna.
Mm,
So in 1991 or whenever she, and I must have been about 7 or something when she did that In Bed with Madonna tour. I used to watch that on repeat. And she had those cone breasts and she was in bed and I just was like wanted to be her. So I began very early like not exploring with sexuality, but that's what conditioned me to understand what being sexual was. And maybe that's Jinky 59 as well, because there's nothing wrong with that side.
yeah.
But that was my very early there was abuse as well, but not not I was molested, but not like extremely, I mean, not extremely. Um, but that I remember also, yeah, there was definitely awareness. Um, but I think porn also inspired, but I think it really began with Madonna. But I also had a very performative nature when it came to sex. Like I loved being, but then that's just who I am as well. Like I am. That's why I did pole dancing because that I enjoy it. That is 59 energy. But I had I've had great intimacy as well and great. I know I'm not always talking about it, but some of the men I've been with, yeah, I've had really, even though they weren't my husbands or my long term partners, we had really beautiful, present sex. Although a lot of it was on drugs as well. So a lot of well, I was just on drugs a lot of the time, actually. Now, thinking back, that's why when the Ghost of Lover Past came back, this for me, this was a whole new world because I'm going into this like sober, actually. Yes,
Mhm.
I did have some. There was like a few nights where we went off the rails, for old time's sake, but most of the time it was present and it was great. It was really, really good, but it wasn't the context wasn't going to work for me. And I really, really, really look forward to my next 20 years as a woman. I'm 42 now, and the next 20 years of my sexuality is going to be deep, sacred sexuality. I want tantra, I want presence, I want depth, I want adventure, I want it all. I want it all. And yeah, so that's why I'm excited to meet. I'm not desperate to meet, but I'm open and ready for those 20 years of or more. It doesn't have to be 20 years. It could be fucking 40 years.
Absolutely, and
Oh,
so,
but
like
yeah. No,
go
sorry.
ahead.
No, I was gonna say just but yeah, so those early conditionings have I'll take what I liked, but I'm really excited. I'm really excited about sex.
Yeah, so that's why I was gonna ask you because I know for me, like, okay, I went through all of those phases in my youth, but probably around like 28-ish or whatever, I was exposed to like sacred sexuality and tantra and Karma Sutra and all of those learning that, breath is the foundation of pleasure and that even if you're tuned into your body, when you inhale and exhale, your sexual organs are stimulated just by your breath. Like this is, a life force that's living within you that's moving, breathing, ready to be expressed in everything that you do, not just through,
Yes.
intimacy in a sexual nature, but that erotic energy is who you are and how you express your divinity. And so I began to learn that, late into my, adulthood in my late 20s, early 30s.
That's amazing.
Um, yeah, to be able to, then get my own education in sex that's outside of my trauma,
Yeah,
religious, family, you know, society, pornography, all of those places, and being able to go to a place of, sacred sexuality and sensuality, and being able to
mhm,
research those things and explore those things with partners. And,
yeah.
and that when you said that, it just made me want to, I always tell people, the foundation of pleasure is breath. So if you're interested in tantra and you want to, invite some of that into your bedroom, a beautiful place to start is breath work. But how did you get into like tantra and sacred spirituality and this desire that you have now for this conscious partnership?
So when I had my awakening, I went to Thailand and I was in Koh Phangan, which is like sacred sexuality everywhere. But what happened was I had been raped by that partner. I had been in an abusive relationship and I was like, this is not my identity. It's not the woman I am. It's not like I and also I look back at my own avoidance and my detachment from myself, my body, my denial, and I was like, I want, because this was a 6 year period of relationship with this guy, not relate, but booty call. And I'm like, no, I want to reclaim my intimacy and my sexuality. So I booked into a tantra retreat. So, but I wasn't ready. I've told this story before, but I wasn't ready for this. So I didn't, I did the first half, which was a lot of breath work and running around and, like working with the energy. But I didn't go into the deep. But so that was my awareness. That was like point one. Oh, there's something sacred about sexuality that I feel a call for. And I actually owned a copy of the Kama Sutra back in the day. Like on my bookshelf, I had the Kama Sutra. So that was always I was always knew that this was good, but I just hadn't. I was deep in my career. So when I'm saying to people, like when I was in, that's why my retreat is called Healing the Huntress, because there are many high achieving women that don't realize that their lives are on autopilot, that they're not, there's no balance because you're being driven by your father wounds and your mother wounds and a distorted masculine template. So I want to help those women come back into balance and into their feminine embodiment. But so that was my first, like, okay, there's something there. But then my awakening journey took me on a years of isolation. Like I was plucked out of life really and society. And it was that November when I had the call for Sacred Union that came out of nowhere because I'd never ever been a woman who wanted that. Like that wasn't a pathway for me in but then the call came. So last year I bought courses. I've bought just like not intense like proper ones, but introduction courses to um The Multi-Orgasmic Woman by Mantak Chia. So I began like that. I bought a course on sacred sexuality and I began exploring that. I bought some stuff on like tantric exercises and things like that. So I'm doing that work on myself. I don't have, unfortunately, a partner to experiment and play with, but the journey has begun. So my journey into my pleasure, my self-exploration, and being ready to cultivate that life force energy and there was a lot of work that had to happen in my womb. There was
Hmm.
a lot of work, like, I began moving my body again. I began really embodiment, connecting with my body, and I bought some new vibrators, and like, began really playing, really learning what I love or what turns me on. And so I'm basically in the preparation phase for meeting the man that can meet me in that depth for us to enjoy a new experience of sex. And say I call it sacred sexuality. I'd also call it conscious. That's why everything's about conscious for me. Is it conscious
Hmm.
partnership, conscious sex, conscious connection? And I will invest as time goes on. I will probably invest a lot more energy and time in developing that aspect of myself. So going to learn tantra from a master, that really is a calling for me.
Yeah. I think that, this is just a good place for each of us to kind of just reflect on what our preference is. Now that, you've kind of had a full view of what all of the options are, or if you haven't had a full view of what all the options are, making sure that you expose yourself so that whatever belief system you're holding about sexuality is aligned with your preference and your desires and not just what was imposed on you through other means, and that's just one of those ways of reclaiming that authority to say, okay, well, these are all the ways to look at sexuality and this is my preference. This is the route that I want to take, without any outside, you know, coercion or influence as to how you view sexuality.
Mm,
Just whose ideals, do you prefer?
yeah. I think we touched on this last time as well, but I think definitely the wisdom that came out of the last experience for me, and as I step into and as I guide other women actually into um what I call their queen era and their feminine magnetism and how to embody the feminine, the high feminine, as my goddess guide told me. She said, I'm taking you on an initiation into high feminine embodiment. And so I've been guided from my own actual guide. Um, Goddess Sufi is the name of that guide. And I think it's about creating standards before attraction clouds them. So instead of going into things out of default, when you consciously have a set of standards that you are living by, you're not going to, like for me, I need to be courted. That is now a standard. It wasn't a standard before. How a man approaches me is very different from anything that I would allow before. That's not fully the case in the last few years, but it wasn't conscious. So I've had men fly me to cities, take me to Michelin restaurants, do beautiful things, put me like those kind of things have happened. I've had men court, but not men that I wanted to be courted by as well. So I didn't really pursue it. Um, but I've had masculine step up in a different way. But now, yeah. So what you thinking and saying about that?
Yeah, I think it kind of starts in what you were talking about of like pleasure over performance because the first step in really setting standards is familiarizing yourself with what it is that you desire, what brings you pleasure, what it is that, truly honors your sexuality. And it takes, for me, it took that exploration that you were talking about with myself in order to map my own pleasure. Do I know what I enjoy? Do I know what kind of touch stimulates me, excites me? Do I know what it feels like when I'm aroused and ready for penetration? Do I know, where my pleasure threshold is and, like those type of things? Can I bring myself to the edge and back and forth? You know what I'm saying? Understanding how my own body works so that I'm not just in the bedroom focused on this other person, but there's pleasure there for me as well. And I know how to derive that pleasure for myself and how to guide my partner in
Mm.
providing that pleasure to me or whatever. And then that puts me in a place where I am able to set standards because of instead of accepting whatever it is that I'm offered, I can demand what it is that I deserve now that I know what it is that I truly desire. And so as far as, like, standards are concerned, like you say, you wanna have courtship. For me, I need to have a deep level of intimacy before sex ever comes into the picture. That's the thing for me is I need that connection and that intimacy before penetration in order for
100%.
me to want to engage in that. I'm demisexual, sapiosexual. In order for me to enjoy sex, there has to be an emotional connection. For me to like reach my full pleasure, I have to be emotionally connected to the person that I am dealing with. And that's just the standard for me. And not everybody is set up like that, but it's through my own exploration that I realized this emotional connection piece is very important to me. I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm empathic. If I don't have this emotional piece, there's going to be a part of me that's not satisfied by this encounter. And so understanding that, hey, that's a standard that I have to set. If we can't, create intimacy and a deep um genuine emotional attachment outside of sex, then we'll never get there.
100,000%, and that's what I learned with the ghost. That's why we couldn't, because there were that it was like he was wanting, that was it. It was sex and nothing else. Even though we had an original, that's why when I went back, I was bringing the emotional connection that we had 10 years ago, but that wasn't me. It wasn't the same on his side, and that could be from his trauma, from his experience, like how he's now, because he's using sex as like that's his only thing. It's like I don't know what's going on, but he like prides himself as this sexual like genius or whatever. So all of his new material and his songs are all about how much pleasure he can bring to a woman, but it's very detached from. And he was in a marriage for a very long time that was unhappy for him. So that's maybe his awakening and his path of freedom and experience and his journey. Um, but what I like immediately, so the first time we got no, the second time we got back together, like he made me squirt. That was the first time I had squirted, and I was very open. I was very receptive. It was amazing. But then because as the weeks went by and time went by, and there was no emotional connection, and there was no intimacy, and there was no, he did not want, he was blocking that in every single way. My desire got less and less and less, and I realized then as well, I will not. But then that's to me is just part of the fact of having a actual conscious partnership. But maybe you're right. Maybe I can still have a deep emotional connection with someone that doesn't necessarily have to be my sacred partner or my husband. Um, but yeah, that for me is a non-negotiable. I can't. I'm not going to want to surrender and build anything with a man that is purely based on the physical. It This means nothing to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think another important standard for me is around finance, and not because sex is transactional for me, but because I understand the connection between um my sacred portal and abundance that is provided to anyone that has access to it, right? So, like, my body and my sexuality is a way for me to access the abundance that's available to me throughout the universe. So, if I'm allowing someone into that space, for me, it has to be someone that's willing to share with me financially the benefit that they are going to get from having access to my portal. Because when I'm having sex, it's intentional. A lot of times it is a very specific thing that I want to manifest, and sometimes it is money. So why would I be manifesting money with somebody that's not willing to share their increase with me? So that's becoming like very important thing for me of like, does this man have provider energy? And it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary all the time. It's, if I am in need, is this someone that I can call upon and they're going to come and meet, provision in whatever way is possible for them to do
Fine,
so.
resources.
And I mean, it seems like a common sense thing now, but
No.
prior, it just wasn't something that I was concerned about. It's like, I was, I have my own money. I don't need a man for this, that, and whatever, INDEPEND, like all of that, thing, that idea about like, I don't want that. And I also never wanted to feel like I was using someone for money, so I had this aversion to even being open to receive in that way, but now that I'm in a more receptive space, it's something that I require. It's a standard. It's just like non-negotiable. Hey, if this aspect isn't something that you're interested in, then this is just not the lane for us. We're incompatible.
Exactly, 100% for me as well. And that's again coming out of that father wound energy and that hyper independent woman, that huntress, moving into actually, I am invested in, I am provided for, I am, yes, yes, yes. There was something there I want to just pick up on, sexual magic, sex magic. Talk me through this.
Hmm.
Talk us through it. Give us a ritual, maybe. Is there a
Okay.
practice you say? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think one of the, like I said, most powerful, easy ways for somebody that's a beginner to connect is through breath. And so, it doesn't have to be like super like mystical and you know, uh as woo woo as like somebody may imagine it to be or whatever, I think a lot of things that are important, just the foundation is preparation. How did you prepare the space?
Mm.
So, for me personally, I love a Palo Santo.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
it's just something about Palo Santo that just raises the energy in the room for me
And it
personally.
smells so good.
But, as a tourist, I love I need all of my senses tantilated. So, preparing the space, one of those things is gonna be is like, how do I create, an energy in this space that is welcoming to intimacy and creation? So that's the foundation is like preparing the space. Like I said, I like to like Palo Santo. Lighting is important. So like I have my little handy dandy camera light here and I can change it to different colors. If I'm in one of those moods, we might do a red. If I'm like seriously wanting to operate in my divinity, I might put on an orange light. And so like just things like that of like preparing the space. And then once the space is prepared, mutual intention setting. So being able to sit down with your partner and say, "Hey, as we go into this sacred space, as we open up this portal, what is it that we want to bring from the spiritual world into this material world and vice versa? Like, is there something that we want to release and send back? And, just sitting together and having an intention of, hey, this is what we're going to do through this interaction with one another is a very powerful move. So you prepare the space, you set an intention, and then the foundation of tantra is breath work. So, something very easy that you can do is simply syncing your breath with your partner. So face to face in a missionary position, or have him sit straight up in the bed and you straddle him and just be face to face with one another. And as he exhales, you inhale his breath. And as you
Mhm.
exhale, he inhales your breath. And it creates a cycle between the two of you. And you can add movement to that or whatever it feels, but just start in that base of breath. So that's a very simple practice that anybody can follow, a ritual that anybody can, put your own pizzazz to or whatever. Just setting the space, making sure that the space is prepared, setting an intention, and then starting with some breath work and linking your energy in that way and kind of just flowing from there.
Beautiful. And so we had a bonus little ritual today that we didn't expect.
I love sacred sexuality so much. It's one
Well,
of those
we
things
we should
that
do we'll do another episode on it as well.
yeah.
Cool, because actually we haven't really this isn't about sacred sexuality. So the next episode, not maybe not the next one, we'll decide, but we will do an episode. So it'll be a 3-part series, a 10-part series, a manuscript. But we've covered like how we give away our power, how we reclaim it, and then moving into the embodiment, the empowerment. So actually it
And how
makes
you
sense.
operate in it.
And the evolutionary pathway of the maiden to the queen, really. Yeah. All right. So, what would you like to leave the audience to leave with? What thought today would you like them to leave with?
I think something important that we kind of had on the list that we didn't talk about is two things, but they're very connected to one another. That attention doesn't equal debt, and no is a complete
Oh,
sentence.
okay.
Those
Well,
things kind of link very well together. Of like, hey, just because you've been taken on a date,
yeah,
bought gifts, flew out, there's nothing that anybody can do for you that obligates you to give your body to them or whatever,
yes,
unless there's like a even if you agree to it, you still can say no. So it's
yeah.
just about, making sure that you never feel like you're in a situation where you owe someone sex because of something they have done for you or given to you. You always can say no, and no is a complete sentence, and you can, be able to walk away from a situation. Just making sure that you understand that someone's giving you attention or attending to you isn't an automatic pathway to your sacred portal.
I think that's so important, and I think there are many women listening who still will struggle. And this is linked to the mother wound, which we cover in the mother wound section in the receptivity codes. If you're struggling with receiving, there is a lot, or guilt. If you struggle to say no and there's a big guilt around it, or if you think you have to actually give yourself because somebody, you're not in your high feminine. The high feminine is here to receive, and that's the difference between women who are treated you can have the same man, but because of her standard, he's going to treat you in a different way. So we've got one man, one woman, he takes her out to dinner and she gives him the pussy, you know, and then the other woman, he takes her out and he's in his masculine, he's earning, he's investing, and he's now, that's the woman that he's going to treat with investment and constant investment because she set the standard, but also that's how men work. Men
Mhm.
want to earn you. They do not want to just have access to you. That's where you become the situationship, you become the fun girl, you become the one that he just sees you. You're just accessible. But the woman he actually works for, earns and invests in, that's a whole different caliber. And so you have to learn, because I was that other woman before. I've learned how to operate like that, and that's not, and there's nothing. It's actually it's polarity. It's how it's designed.
Yeah,
So,
and it makes me think about, like, how you're always talking about magnetism and polarity. It puts the man in a situation where simply he's invested and nobody just walks away from their investment. So, as a person who has, grown through attachment issues throughout my life or whatever, of like wanting to figure out, okay, well, what can I do to make this person stay? One of the most influential things that you can do is to have a high standard and make someone earn access to you, because they're not going to want to walk away from what they've invested in you without the return on it.
and also, yeah, it's that, and yeah. I guess we've covered it. I was just gonna say it's very backwards for a lot of us who felt that we had to be in our provider energy, and because again, this is a father wound issue where you didn't have masculine provision, or you believed you have to choose. Like, when you operate from the belief that you need to be chosen, you're auditioning for love, you're proving your value, you're going halves on things, um you're you're being in your masculine ultimately, because you don't, because you either you're conditioned, and this is about the conditioning piece, or you just don't understand polarity yet, because that piece is huge for me. Like, once I got it, because having been a woman who always provided, you will attract men who need to be provided for as well.
Mhm.
That's so there's a lot we can do. Belief coding, we could do my shadow to sovereign pathway. There's a lot of work that has gone into becoming the queen, to be honest, and moving out of that identity of the woman who has to audition and give to receive. It's not going to end nicely for you. You're going to keep repeating and keep either attracting effeminate men, men who need to be babied, men who need a mother. And so this is about you. You need to understand your role in learning how to operate. So we're going to wrap up. So, any lasting thoughts? Last question, or anything for the people, our
Yeah, I
people.
think just my final thought is gonna be a repetition of something that I said earlier. That's kind of like been a theme of mine, is rather than accepting what you're offered, demand what you deserve.
Yeah. Demand what you deserve. Yeah. Cool. All right. So, as always, if there are any questions, we'd love to start a conversation. We'd love listeners to share, like, subscribe. If you want to work with us, please reach out. You've got my email in the description. You've got Sunshine's connections as well, and her link tree is in there. You know, make this the bridge to actually today taking the action to stop being where you are and work with us to become the identity of the woman who receives, who experiences devotion, who stops operating from the wounding. We have the modalities, we have the tools, we have the guidance. Um, don't just listen and be passive. Stop sitting where you are. Make the choice to move today. All right. Thank you. Love you. Any questions in the thing? Let's drop them in there, and we can do a show around it, or just have a conversation.